Welcome back to the course of Foundation Engineering. In our previous lecture, we are focusing on how to calculate the consolidation settlements in the foundation, and we have also discussed about what are the different problematic soils on which the foundations are going to be constructed on, where we said we have talked about collapsible soil and expansive soil. Okay. So towards the end of the discussion, we were trying to talk about what is meant by expansive soil, and based on what is called as your Atterberg limits, how do we determine whether that particular soil is to be called as an expansive soil or non-expansive soil? So based on your shrinkage limit values, we said we can go on to determine whether the particular soil is to be called as an expansive soil or not. That's nothing but identification of an expansive soil depending on your Atterberg limits. That could be your plasticity chart, based on plasticity chart, or based on your shrinkage limit data. You can go on to find out or identify the expansive soils. So in today's class, we'll continue our discussion from where we have stopped in our last class. That is, we'll start with some fundamental terms which are going to be helpful for us in understanding the characteristics of that so-called expansive soil. In case if that particular soil is identified as an expansive soil, so how much amount of expansion that takes place, what is the pressure that is going to be exerted in the process of swelling or expansion which is happening in the soil. So because of that expansion, what is happening? Let's say, for example, I have a compound wall which is constructed on a foundation. So the soil which is there below that particular foundation of the compound wall, if that particular soil is swelling, so what is going to happen? So volume of the soil is increasing. In the process, your compound foundation of that particular portion of the compound wall is trying to get lifted in the upward direction. So why is it getting lifted in the upward direction? Because there is some pressure exerted by that particular expansive nature of soil at the bottom of the foundation, which is trying to lift your foundation in the upward direction. So we are going to be even talking about how much is that pressure, what is going to be exerted by that soil because of that nature of expansion or because of that nature of swelling. Okay, so which tries to lift your structure, which tries to cause what is called as differential settlements in the structure, resulting in the crack formation of your pavements, or maybe in your floorings, or in the surface of your compound wall, etc. So in all such particular cases, you should certainly understand some important parameter, that is what we call it as swell pressure. So how much is the pressure that is going to be exerted by the soil which is undergoing that swelling nature. Okay, so that pressure is what we call it as swell pressure. So that's all. That's what we are going to be talking about in today's class. And in continuation to that, we'll be trying to talk about what is meant by contact pressure distribution. In the earlier classes, we just had an idea of what is meant by contact pressure. But in today's class, we'll try to understand a little more in detail about what is this contact pressure distribution, on what parameters this contact pressure distribution depends on, that we'll be talking about. Right. So let's quickly go ahead in knowing about what is meant by free swell index. So based on this free swell index, how do we understand how much effect of expansion is going to be there, or whether that particular soil is to be really called as a problematic soil, very serious, or okay, not an issue? How do we understand? So let us try to know that based on this parameter, what is called as free swell index. So for determining this, what is called as this free swell index, what I'll try to do is, I'll be taking two beakers, or let's say two glass jars of some standard volume. Both are of same standard volume. Let's say some 100 ml beakers is what I am trying to take, or 100 ml jars is what I am trying to take. In one beaker, in both the beakers, in fact, I am going to add the dry soil particles. Okay, so what I am just trying to do is, I am taking 10 grams of dry soil, passing through 425 microns C. So it means that the particles, that so-called 10 grams dry soil, what I am trying to take, is going to be having their size of the particles less than that of 425 microns. That is what it is. Okay. So in both the glass jars, glass beakers, I am taking 10 grams each of dry soil. When in one particular glass jar, what I am trying to do is I am adding water. In this case, water is added. In the other case, what I am just trying to do is I am trying to add kerosene. Okay, water is said to be bipolar in nature. That's nothing but water is called as your polar liquid, and kerosene is said to be what is called as non-polar liquid. So it means non-polar in the sense kerosene will not have any kind of interaction happening between your soil grains. Okay, so kerosene will not get absorbed by the soil grains which are present in that particular beaker. Whereas as the water is said to be bipolar in nature because of the cation exchange, so water particles gets absorbed by your clay mineral which is present in that particular soil grains. So that particular so-called clay mineral which is trying to absorb your water particles here is your montmorillonite mineral. So because of that absorption capacity of that montmorillonite mineral, so the volume of that particular soil grains which are kept in that glass beaker is going to increase. So now what I am trying to do is I have taken two identical jars of some standard volume, let's say 100 ml. Now into that, in both the beakers, I have placed some 10 grams of dry soil particles passing through 425 microns. And in jar 1, I am going to be adding water to ensure that the total volume of the water which is going to be filled in this will make the solution of 100 ml. Now here in the other case, I am going to be adding kerosene so that the total volume is nothing but it is 100 ml. Now I will be allowing this. First, we'll add water in one beaker. We'll be adding kerosene in the other, and we'll try to allow this water to interact with the soil grains which are placed in the beaker for 24 hours. So we'll allow this process to continue for 24 hours, and after 24 hours period of time, then what we are going to be seeing is at the bottom of that particular beaker, initially let's say the volume of the soil grains in this, if there are some 8 ml in terms of volume, if I am trying to represent. Okay, so it has occupied the volume of let's say 8 ml in the beaker. Now after the absorption of water, the volume of this soil grains which are placed in this has increased, which indicates that no, the volume of the soil has increased. Let's say it has become some 10 ml. But whereas in the case of soil grains which are placed in the kerosene, the volume is not going to get changed at all, because as the kerosene is said to be non-polar liquid material, so there is no absorption happening of kerosene on the surface of your soil grain particles. So now ultimately what we are going to be finding out here is we are trying to find out what is called as free swell index. Now how are we going to find out this free swell index? FSI is something what I can write it. It is defined as the ratio of volume of soil which is placed in water minus the volume of soil which is placed in kerosene divided by volume of soil which is placed in kerosene into 100. Now it's not the initial volume, it is the final volume. After 24 hours of time, if I come back to see now what is the volume of the soil grains which are placed in that glass beaker which is added with water, and what is the volume of soil grains which is placed in that beaker which is added with kerosene. So here in the notation, VW indicates it's the volume of soil grains existing in water, and VK indicates the volume of soil grains which is existing in non-polar liquid, that's kerosene. So that's how we go on to calculate what is called as free swell index. And once the free swell index value is known, depending on this free swell index ratio, that is, if free swell index value of that particular soil is less than 25%, then we say it's not at all a problematic soil. Though there is slight swelling happening, slight increase in volume happening in that particular soil, but that increase in volume, that swelling nature is relatively considered to be non-problematic in nature. In case if that free swell index, what we are talking about, if it is in between 25 to 50%, then we say that particular soil to be lightly expansive. In case if the free swell index value, if it is in between 50 to 100%, then we say that particular soil to be moderately expansive. And in case if the free swell index value of that particular soil is greater than 100%, we say that particular soil to be highly expansive. So that's how we are going to determine the condition of that particular soil depending on the parameter what is called as your free swell index. So likewise, we'll be trying to talk about another parameter, which is what we call it as your swell potential, or rather we also call it as swell pressure. So as I told you earlier, so because of the swelling nature of the soil, the pressure exerted by that particular soil at the bottom of any particular structure, it could be a foundation, it could be your pavement, okay, so it could be anything, it could be a flooring. So what is the pressure exerted by that particular swelling nature of soil at the bottom of your foundation, or at the bottom of your any pavement surface? Okay, so that pressure is what we call it as swell pressure or swell potential. So now we'll try to understand how to identify how much is going to be the swell pressure of that particular soil. If I know how much is the swell pressure, then in order to counterbalance that amount of so-called swelling or expansion in volume that is taking place, how much is the corresponding pressure that has to be applied on that particular soil? Because if the pressure which is trying to cause the swelling, or because of the nature of swelling, the pressure exerted, if it is counterbalanced by the reaction force what can be applied on that particular soil, then you don't see any increase in volume happening in that particular soil. That means there is no failure is what you are going to be coming across. You don't generally come across with any such kind of failure because of the nature of that swelling characteristics of that particular soil. So our objective is to understand how much is going to be the swell pressure value of that particular soil. So if I know the swell pressure value, then to counterbalance that effect of swelling nature in that particular soil, then we'll understand, okay, if the swell pressure of that particular soil is 20 kilopascal, then externally, if I am going to be applying 20 kilopascals of pressure on that particular soil, so then I can counterbalance the effect of that nature of swelling, so that there is no change in volume happening in that particular soil. Increase in volume do not take place, and resulting in non-failure condition that prevails in that particular structures which are constructed on that expansive soils. So what we try to do here is, once again, we'll recall our fundamentals of consolidation test. I am taking an undisturbed soil sample which is collected from the field, which has got some in situ density and water content. Okay, and this soil sample, what I am trying to talk about, is placed in what is called as your odometer ring. And after placing the soil sample in the odometer ring, then I am trying to add water to that particular soil sample. Okay, initial height of the soil sample is known. It's nothing but it's the height of the soil which is placed in your odometer ring when it is collected from your field. So initial height of the soil sample is known, which I can write it as, let's say, H0. So initial height of the soil sample is known. Now once you have added water to that particular soil, as that particular soil is considered to be expansive soil, so what is going to happen? Because of the water which got added to that particular soil in sufficient quantity to ensure the soil becomes fully saturated, so because of which it's obvious that the volume of the soil tries to increase in the process. As the soil cannot radially increase in its dimension, because in the one-dimensional consolidation test, only the deformation in the grains, this should result in what is called as a vertical displacement. So the change in volume here also is going to be indicated in terms of the change in height of the soil sample. So delta H is what is indicating you what is called as increase in height of the soil sample, which is in fact indicating you the increase in volume of the soil sample. Now, what is that we are trying to find out? We are trying to find out what is called as swell potential value of that particular soil. How much is going to be the amount of swelling that takes place in that particular soil is what we are trying to find out. Okay, so this parameter swell potential is defined as the ratio of change in height of the soil sample to that of the initial height of the soil sample into 100. So what is the corresponding increase in height of the soil sample because of the full saturation condition of that expansive nature of the soil? So that is what we are calling it as your swell potential value of that particular soil. In case if the swell potential value SP, what I am trying to talk about is nothing but I am trying to define it as swell potential or swell pressure. If this swell potential value of that particular soil is less than 0.5%, we say that particular soil is not at all a problematic soil. In case if the swell potential value of that particular soil is somewhere in between 0.5 to 1%, then we say that particular soil to be moderately expansive, or rather I can say moderately problematic soil. In case if the swell potential value of that particular soil is greater than 1%, then we say the soil to be highly expansive or highly problematic in nature. So that's what something we are going to be interested in looking at, and based on the swell potential value, we'll be able to understand how much amount of expansion or subsequent shrinkage that takes place in the soil because of the change in moisture content present in that particular soil. Now, our next objective is to understand how much pressure, that's what we are calling it as your swell pressure or swelling pressure. Okay, so how much pressure has to be applied? Okay, so how much pressure has to be applied to reduce in case if there is a swelling happening in the soil because of the increase in moisture in the soil? So how much pressure has to be applied externally on that particular soil sample to counterbalance the effect of swelling in that particular soil? So to reduce swelling, how much pressure I have to apply externally on that particular soil? It's not that I'll allow the swelling to happen and then I'll go on to apply the external pressure on that particular soil sample. No. If I know how much is going to be the swell pressure that will be exerted by that particular soil because of the process of swelling in that soil, then to counterbalance the effect of that swelling, how much is the pressure externally I have to apply on that particular soil to ensure that there is no phenomena of what is called as swelling happening in that particular soil. If swelling is not happening, then it's obvious that there will not be any kind of failures that you are going to be seeing in structures which are said to be lightly loaded in nature. Okay, so to counterbalance such effect of what is called as swelling, what is taking place in the soil, how much is going to be the pressure that is to be applied on the soil, okay, externally, so that your failures in the structures which are said to be lightly loaded can be prevented. So we have got different methods by which you can try to find out this so-called swelling pressure, or the pressure in fact which has to be applied externally to counterbalance the effect of swelling nature in that particular soil. So one of such method, let's say we have got some multiple methods. Let's say method 1. So in method 1, what I'll just try to do is, it's once again your consolidation, typically the consolidation test what I am trying to look at. So what I am trying to do here is, I have taken your soil sample from the field, okay, so which is placed in your consolidation test setup in your odometer ring, and then I have let's say the initial void ratio of the soil corresponds to some value, which is something what I am indicating it as E0 for the corresponding let's say seating pressure what was applied on that particular soil sample, which is referring to what is called as seating pressure. Now what I am doing is I am trying to add sufficient amount of water to that particular soil to allow the free swelling what is expected to happen in that particular soil. So because of that free swelling nature, okay, let's say if the soil has increased in its volume, if the soil is increasing in its volume, I am not trying to change any pressure acting on the soil sample. I am not changing any external loading on the soil. It's the same initial condition. Okay. But however, when the water content is added to that particular soil to ensure that the soil gets fully saturated, because of which the volume of the soil has increased, then the void ratio of the soil increases because of the increase in volume of the soil. So if the void ratio of the soil is increasing, let's say now this is a void ratio what you are going to have in your soil. Okay. Now what I am going to be doing is I'll continue to perform your consolidation test. In the case of consolidation test, what we do, we go on to apply the loading and we see how the dial gauge changes. And whenever you see there is no further change in the dial gauge reading, then we go on to apply the next increment load, and so on. So I'll typically plot a graph what we are going to be getting from your E versus log sigma dash data that we are going to be getting from your consolidation test. Okay. So this is my E versus log sigma dash curve which I have got now. Now, what is that I am interested in finding out? I am interested in finding out how much is going to be the swelling pressure that that particular soil is going to have, so that if I can apply externally that much amount of pressure on that particular soil sample, so that effect of swelling what was expected to develop in that soil can be counterbalanced. So in such particular case, I'll refer to what was my initial void ratio that was existing in that soil. So for that initial void ratio, I'll just extend this point of initial void ratio onto the E versus log sigma dash curve. Wherever it intersects your E versus log sigma dash curve, that point I'll just try to project it onto your horizontal axis, and that stress, what is going to be indicated by projecting that point onto the horizontal axis, is rather what I'll be calling it as here swell pressure, swelling pressure. So that much amount of pressure, if I can apply on my soil sample externally, then you can see that there is no change in volume happening in your soil. If there is no change in volume happening in the soil, means the void ratio existing in that particular soil remains the same, though your sufficient amount of water is added to that soil, which tries to cause a full saturation in the soil, because of which if the soil is trying to swell also, that external pressure what you have applied will not allow the soil to have the swelling taking place in that particular soil. So that's how I can, this is one of that method by which I can try to determine what is called as the amount of swell pressure, or the pressure that is to be applied externally on the soil sample to counterbalance the effect of nature of swelling in that particular soil. This is one method. Let's say I have got some other method, let's say method 2. If I am looking at the second method, so procedure wise everything remains the same. Typically, once again, we are going to be looking at a graph which is plotted between E versus log sigma dash based on the data what we get from the consolidation test. Here I know what is the initial void ratio of the soil sample. Then now here, what in this test what we are going to be doing is, I'm not adding sufficient amount of water to ensure the soil gets fully saturated. What we are trying to do is, some slight amount of water is added to the soil, because of which slight increase in volume took place. This is now the current void ratio in the soil sample. So to counterbalance that effect of swelling which took place in the soil, I am trying to increase the loading on the soil. Some load is applied, because of which I get some curve like this. Okay. So next what I'll try to do is, I'll add some more water to the soil. Once again, some increment in load. Some more water is added. Some increment in load. Some more water is added, some increment in load. I'll continue this process. At some point of time, what we see is that though you are adding some more water, you are not seeing much change in the volume of the soil, which indicates that there is no further change in volume of the soil taking place. Whenever you find there is no further change in the volume of soil happening, or which represents that there is no change in the void ratio or taking place in that particular soil, because of that excess water which is still available with the soil, where that nature of so-called swelling is counterbalanced because of the amount of external pressure what was applied on that soil. So in such particular case, when there is no further change in the void ratio of the soil, then you can project that point onto the horizontal axis, and this indicates you what is called as your swell pressure in that particular soil. Okay, this is one of the way by which you can try to find out how much is going to be your swell pressure. We have also got some other approach or some other method, let's say another method, which we call it as 3 odometer method. Okay, so here in this particular approach, we are going to be making use of 3 odometer test setups. 3 identical soil samples collected from the same depth from the field, From same location at the same depth, you are going to be collecting 3 identical soil samples. Those 3 identical soil samples are going to be placed in 3 odometer test setups. Okay, so let me plot that graph, what I am trying to talk about, E versus log sigma dash. Okay, so on soil sample 1, soil sample 2, let's say this is sample 1 subjected to some external loading, let's say something sigma 1, sample 2 subjected to some external loading sigma 2, sample 3 subjected to some external loading sigma 3. All these 3 soil samples are allowed to have full saturation by adding water. Okay, so you have added water to those 3 soil samples to ensure that the soil is fully saturated, and in case 1 on that soil sample sigma 1 stress was getting applied. Let's say the initial void ratio of that soil sample was referring to this value, something E naught. Okay, now what I am just trying to do, on soil sample 1 I have applied some sigma 1 stress, soil sample 2 I have applied some sigma 1 stress, soil sample 3 I have applied some sigma 1 stress. Okay, so because of that sigma 1 stress what was applied on the soil sample, there might have been slight compression which took place in that soil sample. Then the corresponding void ratio, what it would be referring to, for the amount of vertical stress applied on the soil sample was sigma 1. And on soil sample 2, where sigma 2 is higher than sigma 1 and sigma 3 is further higher than sigma 2. For that case, if higher amount of stress was applied on the soil sample 2, higher amount of pressure was applied on the soil sample 2, some higher amount of compression would have happened in the soil after the free swelling process was completed, which could have indicated the condition referring to that of the applied stress sigma 2 and the void ratio existing in the soil sample may be this one. And in the case of sample 3, the corresponding void ratio, what it was referring to would be this value, and the stress, what it was referring to, is sigma 3. So if I am just trying to join these 3 points by means of a smooth curve, okay, let's say I am getting some curve like this, and I am referring to my initial void ratio value, and that initial void ratio point, if I am just trying to extend it onto your curve what you have plotted. So wherever that point intersects your curve, just drop that point onto the horizontal axis. So wherever that point intersects on your horizontal axis, it refers what is called as your swell pressure value of that particular soil. So we are trying to find out this swell pressure value based on 3 different consolidation tests what you are going to be performing on identical soil samples, which are initially allowed to get fully saturated, because of which free swelling took place in sample 1, sample 2, sample 3. And on sample 1, you are applying some external pressure of sigma 1, sample 2, sigma 2 pressure. On sample 3, sigma 3 pressure is applied. And for that applied pressures, you will try to understand how much is the final void ratio that remains in the soil sample. And I locate those void ratios corresponding to those applied state of stress. Okay, so this is the void ratio in the sample 1 for an applied stress of sigma 1. There is a void ratio in the sample 2 for an applied stress of sigma 2, and there is a void ratio referring to sample 3 corresponding to an applied applied pressure of sigma 3. So from that 3 points, I am just trying to join those 3 points by means of a smooth curve, and by extending the initial void ratio value of that soil onto that curve, I am trying to determine what is called as your swell pressure value of that particular soil. Once we know what is the swell pressure value of that particular soil, then in order to counterbalance the effect of the swelling nature in that particular soil, that much amount of external pressure is what I am going to be applying on that particular soil. Now, what are the methods? Okay, what are the different methods to counteract the expansion in your black cotton soils or your expansive soil? Black cotton soil is one of the example of your expansive soil. So what are your remedial measures or the ground improvement techniques that you can think of to counterbalance the issues or to take care of the issues that you are coming across in the case of your expansive soil? One Easiest thing what we can do is we can replace that particular soil which is said to be expansive in nature and refill that region with a soil which is not said to be problematic in nature. This is easiest thing, but it's not always possible because excavating that particular soil and then refilling and completing the process of consolidation would take a longer period of time. So it may not be a feasible solution in all such cases. Second thing what we can do is we can go for pre-wetting. That so-called swelling which was expected to happen in the later stages of time because of the saturation levels increasing in the soil. So before the construction itself, if you can ensure the proper pre-wetting in that particular soil, let the free swelling happen, and then to counterbalance that free swelling what is happening in that soil, the amount of external pressure what was getting applied through that particular structure on the soil should be more than that of your swell pressure what gets exerted by that particular soil. If I can ensure that with proper pre-wetting and proper compaction, then you will not be facing that particular problem of your expansive nature resulting in the failure of your structure or structural components. And another approach is by what is called as chemical method. So in the process of this chemical method, what we try to do is we add lime or cement. So by adding lime or cement, we try to bond your soil grains particles strongly to one another, so that because of that nature of strong bonding what is getting developed between your soil grain particles, so that so-called nature of expansion, that so-called nature of swelling can be minimized because of the strong bonding what was existing between those soil grains. So typically from the experimental studies what has been understood is, if you are going to be talking about addition of lime to that existing expansive soil, so what we do is we add 4 to 6% optimized value of lime that is to be added is somewhere around 4 to 6%. So 4 to 6% of lime is going to be mixed thoroughly with that expansive soil, and then later the soil is going to be properly compacted to ensure that a proper strong bond gets developed between your one soil grain to the other soil grain because of the chemical agent what is present between them is, that is your lime or cement. So in the case of cement, if you are adding, then we say optimized percentage of cement to the soil ratio can be 2 to 3%. If you add more than that 3%, then what happens is effectively not much change in your addition of cement will will be seen there. If you add more and more amount of cement, what would happen is, yeah, more stronger bonding would between the particles would develop, but you don't see effective reduction in swelling characteristics of the soil there, which results in what is called as your cost of your construction or cost of your ground improvement techniques are going to be expensive. Okay. So you have to understand optimally how much has to be used there. And this is some of those techniques by which you can counterbalance the effect of your expansion in the structure. There are some other ways by means of your structural aspect. Okay, we can try to counterbalance this effect of expansive nature which results in the failure of the structure. So what we are going to be doing there is by providing what is called as under-reamed piles. Okay, so by providing what is called as under-reamed piles, we can try to ensure that if soil is trying to swell also, this under-reamed piles prevents your upward movement of your structure. So what does this under-reamed pile mean? So you are going to be typically seeing a pile like this with some bulged cross section like this. Now what does this bulged cross section does? This is what we call it as your bulb. Okay, so what is this bulged cross section going to do? If your soil which is there below this bulged cross section, if it is exerting the pressure on that bulb, so what does that bulb tries to do? Bulb tries to move in the upper direction, but in the process, the soil grains which are there above your bulged portion will not allow the bulged cross section to relatively move in the upper direction easily. Okay, so that's how you can minimize the effect of swelling, which results in the failure of your foundation or any other structural components there by using what is called as under-reamed piles. So depending on the expansive nature of that particular foundation, you can think of providing an under-reamed pile with one bulb or two bulbs. Okay, so that totally depends on what is the nature of expansion, how much is the amount of expansion, swelling characteristics of that particular soil. And second thing what we can do is, we can try to have a foundation which is constructed like this with inverted beams, something like this. The load what is coming onto this foundation gets distributed through the foundation onto the beam, and from the beam load gets distributed onto the soil. Now what is going to happen, as this is a free space what is available, this region and this region, as this is a free space what is available, if at all the soil which is there below the foundation structure, if it is trying to swell also, or the soil which is there below the region of your beam position, okay, so this is the beam position, the soil which is there below the beam position, if at all if it is trying to swell, if in the process when it is trying to swell, where the swelling tries to get accommodated into the free space what is available between the beams below your foundation. So in that free space, your soil can easily get swelled and can get adjusted. Okay, then if the free swelling is allowed to happen in the soil without causing any lifting in your structure, without exerting any pressure on your structure from the bottom, then we can ensure that there will not be any subsequent failure happening in your soil. So whatever the amount of pressure that gets transferred from your beam onto the soil, I repeat, from the foundation onto the soil, let's say the amount of pressure what you are trying to transfer is something sigma. So if the amount of pressure what you are trying to transfer through the foundation or through the beams onto the soil, if it is greater than that of your swell pressure value of that particular soil, then obvious that you are not going to see any failure happening in that particular structure. So if I know how much is the swell pressure value of that particular soil, then externally try to apply the loading through the foundation onto the soil, where the externally applied pressure is going to be higher than that of your swell pressure value of that soil, then structurally or by any means you don't see any failure happening in that particular structure because of this swelling nature in the soil. So the next topic what we'll get started is with contact pressure. After learning about the problematic soils that are likely to be encountered in the field, so let's now continue our discussion with the next topic, that is what is called as contact pressure and contact pressure distribution. Now what is meant by this term contact pressure? So contact pressure is nothing but we call it as the pressure which is said to be exerted by the soil on the foundation at the contact between soil and the foundation is what is called as your contact pressure. So it is nothing but, as the name itself says, at the contact there is some pressure which is being exerted by the soil on the footing or by the soil at the bottom of your foundation. So that pressure exerted by the soil at the bottom of the foundation is what we call it as your contact pressure. So at the contact of your footing and the soil, the pressure exerted by the soil on the footing is what we call it as your contact pressure. Okay, and this intensity of contact pressure or the so-called contact pressure distribution which we are going to be talking about depends on what factors. Okay, how much is going to be that contact pressure distribution? Whether that so-called contact pressure distribution that we are going to be talking about, whether it is going to be uniform or non-uniform. If it is uniform, then okay. If it is non-uniform, then where is it maximum? Where is it minimum? So all that we have to understand. So for that, let us try to know on what all different factors or parameters your contact pressure distribution would be depending on. So the contact pressure distribution what we are trying to talk about generally depends on three factors. One is the relative rigidity or flexibility of that particular footing. So depending on the nature of flexibility or rigidity of that footing, we'll be able to say, okay, how the contact pressure distribution is going to be, whether it is going to be a uniform contact pressure distribution or a non-uniform contact pressure distribution. Okay, that's what we are going to be talking about. Next is, it also depends on the so-called contact pressure distribution what we are going to be talking about. It also depends on what is called as type of soil, whether that foundation is resting on fine grained soil or coarse grained soil. So depending on that also your contact pressure distribution is going to be changing. And it also even depends on the depth of the foundation. So at what depth that particular foundation is embedded into the ground. So depending on that also your contact pressure distribution is going to be depending on. So first factor, that is your based on the relative rigidity or the flexibility of the footing, how is the contact pressure distribution is going to be depending on. See, this concept of contact pressure distribution is something what you commonly see in most of the competitive examinations. It could be in your IES or maybe in GATE or any other objective oriented examinations that you come across with. These are this is something, a common topic what you would be mostly seeing, like you would be given some set of contact pressure distributions and asked to pick out for which case this is a contact pressure distribution diagram. So likewise you might see different cases of questions you will be coming across from this particular concept of contact pressure distribution diagrams. Okay, so as the first case it says depending on the relative rigidity or flexibility of the footing, how the contact pressure distribution diagram is going to be depending on. So here I am going to be looking at two cases. One is the case of a flexible footing. Okay, there is a case of a flexible footing, and the other is the case of a rigid footing. I'll tell you what is the difference between the flexible footing and the rigid footing. Okay, so I am looking at two footings. One is relatively said to be flexible in nature, other is relatively said to be rigid in nature. Now, what is meant by this flexible footing? Flexible means that particular footing is free to bend or free to deflect. When it comes to your rigid footing, we say there is no bending happening in this particular footing. That is what we call it as your rigid footing. Okay, so when there is an external load that is getting transferred from the column onto the foundation, so if your foundation is trying to bend like this, I don't say exactly it will bend like this, dotted line what I am trying to represent indicates you the bent shape of your footing. So such footing is what we call it as flexible footing, which undergoes the bending because of the load what is getting transferred through it. When it comes to the rigid footing, though there is an external load what is getting transferred through that particular footing, okay, though there is an external load which is trying to get transferred through that particular footing, you don't see any internal deflection happening in the footing. So such footing is what is called as your rigid footing. Okay, so now let's recall from what we have learned from the previous classes. We said in the case of the flexible footing, the so-called contact pressure distribution is what is considered to be uniform contact pressure distribution. Okay, and coming to your settlement, what we are going to be talking about, settlements in that flexible footing, settlements are non-uniform. See, there is a relation between your contact pressure distribution and settlements. Whenever the settlements are non-uniform, the contact pressure distribution is what we get it as uniform. And whenever your settlements are uniform in the sense it is same throughout. Whenever the settlements are uniform, then your contact pressure distribution is going to be non-uniform. Okay, this is something what you should understand. Then once you know this particular point very clearly, then it will be very easy for you to plot how your contact pressure distribution diagram is going to be looking like. So now in the case of the flexible footing, so because of the external load what is getting applied on that footing, the footing is trying to take some bend shape, and that bend shape is indicating you what is called as your settlement. How much settlement that you are going to be having in that particular footing. Okay, so here this deflected shape I have indicated it as maximum settlement indicated at the center and minimum settlement indicated towards the edges, but it's not guarantee that in always the case of flexible footing maximum settlement is going to be at the center. So it also depends on the type of soil. In some type of soil the maximum settlement is going to be at the edge. In some other type of soil the maximum settlement is going to be at the center. Okay, so here this non-uniform nature of what we are indicating is representing a non-uniform settlement, what is going to be happening in this flexible footing. And when it comes to your contact pressure distribution, as we said, the contact pressure distribution is going to be uniform. So that intensity of pressure at that so-called contact pressure, what is getting developed at the contact of your soil and the footing, so that intensity of pressure what gets developed is going to be same throughout. So that's what we call it as uniform contact pressure distribution. And this dotted line what I was representing here was representing you a non-uniform settlements happening in that particular foundation. Now coming to your rigid footing, as there is no bending relatively happening in the footing, so the settlements what you are going to be seeing in that particular rigid footing is going to be a uniform settlement. Uniform settlement indicates it's a non-uniform contact pressure distribution. So your contact pressure distribution is going to be non-uniform, but your settlements in that particular rigid footing are uniform. Okay, so the settlement wherever you calculate, at the center or maybe at the edge. Okay, so the amount of settlement what you are coming across with in the case of rigid footing is going to be same everywhere, irrespective of the type of soil in which that foundation is resting on. Now, when it comes to the case of your contact pressure distribution diagram, so we say that the contact pressure distribution is non-uniform with maximum could be at the center in some kind of soil, or maximum could be at the edge and minimum could be at the center in some other type of soil. Okay, so ultimately what I just want to make you understand here is, depending on the relative rigidity or the flexibility condition of the soil, what we understand is, in the case of your flexible footing, the contact pressure distribution is going to be uniform, whereas your settlements are going to be non-uniform in nature. Whereas in the case of rigid footing, the settlements are going to be uniform throughout the footing. It means that the corresponding contact pressure distribution diagram, to ensure that uniform settlement, the contact pressure distribution diagram is going to be non-uniform. Next, depending on the type of soil, how the contact pressure distribution diagram is going to be changing. Let's say I am referring to the case of footings. It can be either your flexible footing or rigid footing. So I am referring to the case of footings on fine grained soils. So fine grained soils in the sense, let's say it's a clayey soil what I am looking at. If this is your case of the flexible footing, this is the ground or the footing level what I am indicating, and here is the case of your rigid footing resting on the ground or at the footing level what we are representing. So this is a case of flexible footing, this is a case of your rigid footing. Okay, so when your flexible footing is resting on what is called as your fine grained soil, I repeat, when the flexible footing is resting on fine grained soil, as the soil as the footing is said to be flexible, we know that the contact pressure distribution is going to be uniform throughout your footing width. But what I should know is, how is the settlement pattern? Whether the settlement in that flexible footing which is resting on fine grained soil, settlement is going to be maximum at the center or maximum at the edge. If it is maximum at the edge, it is going to be minimum at the center. If it is going to be maximum at the center, then the settlement is going to be minimum at its edges. Okay, so that is something what we should be knowing. So what we see is, the settlement in the case of your flexible footing is going to be minimum at the edges when it is resting on fine grained soil, and it is going to be maximum at the center. Okay, so here this indicates settlement at the corner, and this indicates, okay, let me write it as E. SE. SE indicates here settlement at the edge of your footing, and this indicates settlement at the center. SC is not representing what is called as consolidation settlement. According to the notation what I am using here, SE represents edge settlement, Settlement at the edge of the footing. SC represents center settlement. Settlement at the center of the footing. That is what it is representing. Okay. So at the center of the flexible footing, which is resting on fine grained soil, settlement is going to be maximum when compared to that of your edges. Why is it going to be the settlement maximum at the center of your flexible footing? Okay. So when it comes to the case of your center of your footing, what is going to happen is, as the soil is a fine grained soil, if you have any water particle which is there towards your center of your flexible footing, for that water to get dissipated out, the time required is going to be relatively more. So if the time required for that particular water molecule to get dissipated out, which is present at the center of your flexible footing, if the time required is more, then it means that excess pore water pressures are there at the center of your footing. It can be flexible or rigid. Okay. So when the excess pore water pressures are there at the center of the footing, it's obviously that the strength of the soil at the center, the effective stresses that gets developed in that particular soil, which is there in the center region of your flexible footing. So effective stresses are going to be less. If the effective stresses develop in that soil, or if the effective strength of the soil, if it is less, obvious that your settlements, what you are going to have in that particular footing, in the case of flexible nature of footing, so settlement what you are going to have at the center is going to be more when compared to that of your edges. Okay. So with this basic understanding, let me this dotted profile, what you are seeing here is indicating you the settlement pattern, how we are going to have the settlement in your flexible footing resting on fine grained soil, and your contact pressure distribution diagram is going to be something like this. Contact pressure distribution is going to be a uniform pressure distribution. Uniform in the sense the intensity of the pressure at any point below your flexible footing is going to be same. Now coming to the case of your rigid footing resting on what is called as fine grained soil, as the fundamentals are same. So at the center of your rigid footing, excess pore water pressures would develop, resulting in what is called as your lesser strength for that particular soil. So in order to have a uniform settlement, as we say, rigid footing would undergo what is called as a uniform settlement throughout. So at the center of the footing, at the edges of the footing, the amount of settlement what you'll have is going to be same. So in order to have that uniform settlement to happen, the pressure what gets exerted by the soil on the footing at the edges is going to be more when compared to that of your center of your footing. Okay. So your contact pressure distribution diagram is going to be non-uniform, but however the contact pressure is maximum at the edges and minimum at your center. Now in the same way, when your footings what you are looking at are embedded on what is called as coarse grained soils. So earlier case was footings on your fine grained soils. Now the case is footings on what is called as your coarse grained soils. So once again, it's a flexible footing. This is the case of your flexible footing, and this is a case of your rigid footing. In the case of flexible footing, we know that your contact pressure distribution is uniform, but settlement is non-uniform. So now, when it comes to the case of flexible footing on coarse grained soil, where you are going to have settlement maximum, whether it is at the center or whether it is at the edge. So when it comes to the case of your coarse grained soil, this once the load gets transferred from the flexible footing on that coarse grained soil, which is said to be saturated also. So coarse grained soil will not require much time to have this excess pore water pressure dissipation to happen. So in general fundamentals, if I am trying to understand, so when the load is getting transferred through the flexible footing onto the soil, so the edges of the flexible footing, the soil grains which are available at the edges of the flexible footing would easily get sheared off first. Okay, so those soil grains which are available here at the edges will easily get sheared, relatively getting displaced from its position to some other new position. So it means that the settlement at the edges of your flexible footing, in the case of footing, flexible footing resting on coarse grained soil, settlement at the edge is going to be maximum, and settlement at the center is going to be minimum. Okay. And the subsequent contact pressure distribution diagram, when it comes to, we know that contact pressure distribution diagram is going to be a uniform distribution diagram. So the intensity of pressure at the center of your footing or at the edge of the footing is going to be same. But whereas your settlement, what you are going to be looking at is said to be maximum at the edges of your flexible footing resting on coarse grained soil, and it is said to be minimum at the center of your flexible footing resting on your coarse grained soil. So here in this case, your settlement at the center is going to be less than the settlement what you have at your edge. Whereas in the earlier case of the flexible footing, settlement at the center was greater than that of the settlement at your edge. When it comes to the case of your rigid footing, settlement at the center is nothing but equal to settlement at the edge. Even in this case of rigid footing also, what we are looking at, settlement at the center and settlement at the edge is going to be same. So it's a uniform settlement throughout the footing. But however, what we need to know is how your contact pressure distribution diagram is going to be. In the case of rigid footing, contact pressure distribution diagram is going to be non-uniform. But when the rigid footing was resting on fine grained soil, what we have understood is at the edges, your contact pressure is maximum, at the center it is going to be minimum, and the vice versa is what you are going to be seeing in the case of your rigid footing resting on your coarse grained soil. So at the edges, as the soil grains are easily getting sheared off, the amount of contact pressure what is going to be getting developed at the edge is going to be less when compared to that of what you are going to be having at your center. Center, you'll have it maximum, and the edge, the contact pressure distribution value is going to be minimum. Okay, so yeah, so this is about how, depending on the type of soil, your contact pressure distribution diagram is going to be depending on, based on the flexible footing and the case of your rigid footing. And the third case, depending on your depth of the footing. So at what particular depth your foundation is embedded in, depending on that, how your contact pressure distribution diagram is going to be changing. So in the case of the flexible footing, what we have understood is your contact pressure distribution diagram is going to be uniform. Whether that particular soil on which the flexible foundation is resting is a cohesive soil or non-cohesive soil, it doesn't matter. Your contact pressure distribution diagram is going to be uniform throughout. So that's what is indicated here. In the case, the point one, what we are representing here. So in the case of flexible footings resting on either cohesive or cohesionless soils, the contact pressure is uniform irrespective of the depth of your foundation. Whether you are talking about the foundation embedded nearer to the ground, deeper into the ground, it doesn't matter, or at the ground surface if you are constructing your foundation, it doesn't matter. So in the case of the flexible footing, your contact pressure distribution is going to be uniform irrespective of the depth of that particular footing. But in the case of your rigid footing, okay, so but in the case of rigid footings resting on either cohesive or non-cohesive soils, the contact pressure distribution diagram is going to be varying depending on your depth of the footing. So it's found that your contact pressure distribution diagram gets varied depending on your depth of the footing. Okay, so let us try to quickly have a look at how those contact pressure distribution diagrams are getting changed depending on the depth at which that particular rigid foundations are constructed. Okay, so we are looking only at the case of your rigid footing, not the case of your flexible footing. So rigid footing on fine grained soils. This is the first case. So if you can recall the earlier discussion which we had for the case of your rigid footing, which was resting on your fine grained soil. So this is a case what I am trying to talk about. Okay, this particular case. Okay. What is it indicating? The contact pressure was maximum at the edge of your rigid footing and minimum at the center of your rigid footing. The same thing I am just trying to plot here again. Maximum at the edge and minimum at the center. So this is how your contact pressure distribution diagram is in the case of your rigid footing resting on fine grained soil. This is a rigid footing at shallow depth. Okay, next I am looking at the rigid footing which is constructed at deeper depths. So I just want to understand how is the effect of that depth playing a role in contact pressure distribution diagram. So what we'll see is that at the edge it is maximum still, but however at the center, which earlier when your foundation was at a shallow depth constructed in that fine grained soil, at the center it was minimum, but however as you move into the deeper depths, the intensity of that contact pressure distribution what you are going to be having even at the center will also slightly tries to increase depending on the depth at which the foundation is getting constructed. So this is how typically your contact pressure distribution diagram is going to be looking like in the case of your rigid footing embedded at deeper depths. Okay, and next the case is rigid footing on coarse grained soils. So the next case what we are looking at is the case of your rigid footing which are resting on coarse grained soils. So let me draw my rigid footing. Earlier in the previous case, yeah, this was the case what we have already talked about. Rigid footing resting on your coarse grained soil which is relatively at a shallow depth, which indicates that the contact pressure distribution diagram is having the contact pressure value which is said to be least at the edge and maximum at the center. Same thing I am going to be plotting here. The contact pressure value at the edge is going to be minimum and at the center it is going to be maximum. This is your contact pressure distribution diagram. In the case of the foundation, that so-called rigid footing on coarse grained soils which is constructed at shallow depth. The other case, rigid footing constructed at deeper depths. Okay, so what you see is still at the center the contact pressure distribution value is going to be maximum, but however at the edges also the contact pressure value what is getting developed is going to be increasing when compared to that of the earlier case what you have looked at. Okay, so even at the edges, earlier it was very less at the edge, but now as you go into the deeper depths, even at the edges also the contact pressure distribution value will tries to increase, and the further and further deeper depths if you go ahead, more or less you would be seeing or you would be arriving at what is called as more or less a uniform contact pressure distribution even in the case of your rigid footing on coarse grained soils relatively at a deeper depths. Okay, this is all about how your contact pressure distribution diagram is going to be changing depending on the type of soil in which the foundation is resting, depending on the relative rigidity or the flexibility value of that foundation, and also depending on the depth at which that particular foundation is embedded into that particular soil. Depending on these three factors, your contact pressure distribution is going to be changing. Okay, so we'll stop our discussion for today, and in the next class we'll be continuing our discussion with the designing of your shallow foundation. Design in the sense we talk only in terms of the geotechnical aspect, not the structural aspect, where we are not going to be going into the details of how the reinforcement has to be designed, what is the spacing of the reinforcement, what is the diameter of the reinforcing bars, and so on. We are not going to be talking about your structural aspect of the design. We are going to be focusing on geotechnical aspect of your design. That means knowing about what should be your width of your foundation, what should be the length of the foundation, what is the allowable pressure that was supposed to be getting transferred through that particular foundation, depending on the soil properties already. Based on the soil properties, we know how to estimate your ultimate bearing capacity or allowable bearing capacity or net allowable bearing capacity of the soil. Okay, or if not based on your C5 parameters of the soil, at least based on your SPT value or plate load test data, or maybe based on your cone penetration resistance data, we have seen how to estimate your allowable bearing pressure of that particular soil or of that particular foundation. So now for that allowable pressure, what is getting transferred through the foundation onto the soil, what shall be the dimensions of that particular foundation? That is what we are going to be focusing on. In the next class, we will be discussing that. Starting with what are the different types of, just to give you an insight again, what are the different types of shallow foundation that we are going to be coming across with, and then we'll go into the details of the design aspects of your shallow foundations, which are more commonly used, like your combined footings and your raft foundation. Thank you.